Hey everybody, hope y'all are well. So I'm thrilled right now, and I want to share this. This is something I've been wanting to have working for years now. I've been a long time Cubase user. I love Cubase, and I've been a long time Ableton user. I've used them both uh, for 20 years. And so I love them both. I feel like I consider myself an expert in both of them. They both have just wonderful, beautiful things. And I really like finishing my songs, especially mixing well, what I love about Ableton is how quick it is to get ideas down. I love that. I can't do that as quickly in Cubase. For me, Cubase is basically better at everything else. Um, it's a simplification, but you get the idea. But I have the Ableton Push too, and it's a wonderful, beautiful piece of equipment. I think the Push 2 is worth more to me than Ableton is. I love it. It's amazing. It's great. So I've always wanted to be able to incorporate them both, and I know there's some scripts out there with people doing some MIDI trick stuff ever since the Ableton Push 2 API came out and kind of lighting up lights from Cubase and all that. But it's not giving me what I want. But now I do have what I want, and so I want to share it. This is a pretty advanced video, I think, but you take it a step at a time, and you'll be able to get that set up if you are like me and you love using both of them. Um, Bottom line for me is my preferred method, or I think what I've done now is I made it so I can use Cubase with the features of the Push that I love, specifically the drum rack and the being able to program the drum patterns in the grid mode there, and what do they call it? The in the loop selector mode, so you can kind of build up your drum pattern like that. There's nothing like that in Cubase, and I just use the hell out of that in Ableton. I love it. And then also being able to do switching scales around and playing it. As soon as I had the sort of realization that chromatic mode is essentially like a guitar, or at least the top four strings of a guitar that just keeps on going. Once I saw that, I love chromatic mode in Ableton and in the Push, and I'm so much faster on that than even on a regular keyboard to do complex voicings and stuff. So enough talk. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between kind of showing you a couple of things with the camera here and then the screenshot. So first, let me just, yeah, let's get started. Okay, so first let me just quickly show you how I have the Push set up. So I'm running Ableton in Rewire for Cubase, and Ableton is the slave, Cubase is the host for the Rewire setup. But we'll get to that in a second. So let me just quickly show you what's happening in the Push. All it is I have a synths thing. So I can play all of my synths in Cubase with my typical synths kind of setup. Scales, like I said, they work. So you can switch your scales around however you want. You can be chromatic, blah, blah, blah. So I have a synths, and then I have a drum rack. And the drum rack, as I was saying, it works. So you get in here, it's doing that. It's running in Rewire, so it will go to Ableton. Transport works here. So this is something you cannot do with just regular Rewire. You can't use this setup here, and that was always the drag. But let me show you how I did it. This third track, it doesn't do anything for us, but I will show you what it does here in a minute. And that's it. That's all Ableton's doing. Let's go to the computer now, and we'll look in deeper. Okay, so let's start in Ableton. So we've already looked at the Push. We're not going to be looking at it again. So all I have in here in my synths setup is nothing. It's just an empty MIDI track that's sending to an IAC driver. I'll explain that in a second. Then I have my drum rack here. And in the drum rack, you have to have something in the pads in order to have them show up on the push. Otherwise, um, they're not colored in. So for now, I just threw in a bunch of empty simplers. You're really limited when you're in Rewire mode. You can't use any of your plugins. You can't use external instruments, anything like that. So these simplers here are only here in order to be able to light up the pad. If I can find something lighter on my CPU than simpler, I may do that, but my computer's doing pretty good and not having a problem. So I have 16 pads set up. And now this, if you see, it's just I want to say instrument track because that's what they say in Cubase. It's a MIDI track, but nothing's coming out of it because it's blank simplers and it's hooked up to Rewire. Third track is the MIDI track, and in here we're taking the MIDI from this drum rack, putting it into here. It's in monitor in mode, and then this is being sent out to the IAC driver. This is how we do the workaround to be able to get MIDI out of Ableton, even in Rewire. So if you look here, let me see, I think I've got some, yeah, so this is these are clips that have drums in them. If I play that, you see MIDI activity coming out. Stop that. Okay, so that's basically what's going on in Ableton. Let me go to the IAC driver. So the IAC driver, all I have is I just created two. And I called one synth out of Ableton, and I called the other one drums out of Ableton. If you don't know how to get here, you go to Audio MIDI Setup, and then when you're in Audio MIDI Setup, you go to Windows, or yeah, it'll say, I think, Show MIDI Studio. So you click that, and that opens up the IAC. That opens up. That opens up this window. Then you click on IAC driver, and then you can create new IAC buses like that, and you can name them by double clicking on them. Okay, so that's all we have in the IAC. Let me show you quickly back in Ableton. When you go to the preferences, you need to make sure that input for the IAC drivers is off, because otherwise you get a MIDI feedback loop, and you want output of the IAC drivers and the tracks to be on, because that is outputting. That's what makes them visible here, because otherwise they wouldn't be here. So you can see the synths. I have sending to synths out of Ableton, that IAC driver, channel 1. And the drum rack here, I have that going drums out of Ableton. That's pretty much it for that setup. Let's look in Cubase. All right, so here's the thing that I love is that, I've got a big template that I use in Cubase. You can see, so this is kind of my main template here. If I bring everything out, what is this? Most of these are all disabled, but I think it's around 200 tracks when everything's enabled. But it's basically just there ready for me to go. So, it's all color-coded, ready to go. Makes me happy. So let's look at the drums. I'll just close all this other stuff up. I can't do that in Ableton. Okay, sorry. There's just things about Cubase that I love. Okay, so here's the thing about Cubase that I don't love. Or it may be a Rewire thing. I'm not going to show you. I'm just going to kind of say it and explain it. There's an issue with IAC MIDI in Rewire where it strips. Here, I will actually just show you real quick. If you put a MIDI insert here and you do a MIDI monitor, and now let me play from Ableton. This is kind of, I got to be monitoring it. Sorry. Let's see. That stuff right now. So what's happening? Yeah. Okay. So right now the MIDI is coming in from Ableton into this track over the IAC bus. But look at this position. See how this is all 0? This is fucked up. But what that means is that means you cannot record the IAC MIDI input. Watch what happens if I try and record on this track here. Here, let me get it into the loop. Look at that. So it's just, there's no timestamp information associated with those notes when they come in. So it just freaks it out and it does this and it's not recording anything. When you hit stop, it's just blank. So that is I consider it a bug, but whatever. It's just an aspect of Rewire that makes it so you cannot record IAC MIDI input directly. So the way to get around that is this is an instrument track in Cubase. I put a groove agent in here. And so the IAC MIDI input is coming into here, going into the groove agent. So if you look at when we play here, you see how it's flashing them all. That's all the MIDI from Ableton. Great. But then now I have my drum rack down here with all my sounds, taking the input from my my groove agent kit. This is coming from this VST straight into the drum rack here. So when I click on my this is, if you're not super familiar with Cubase, this is a beautiful thing about Cubase again, is it's kind of like the drum rack in Ableton. It's basically their version. So each one of these is either a sound or in this case, this is a MIDI input going to a MIDI output on a separate VST track down here. So like all my drums and all my kicks are down here. So so yeah, so that's the workaround to be able to record your IAC. If I just clear this out and we take our input from here, if we're playing. So what you're hearing there, that you're hearing the MIDI coming in from Ableton, going through the groove agent into the drum rack and then playing on all of these VSTs. So let me just do that again. Okay, so that's great, but how do you record it? Well, now you can actually record here into the drum rack and it'll just record that directly. So and so there you go. Yep. So see how it was not making any sound. And then when it gets to it, it is. So that's showing that's not Ableton, that's Cubase playing. There is a little bit of latency. If you click in here and zoom way in, you can see that, you get your kind of typical MIDI latency, but, you can do the select all and quantize. Cubase has tons of quantize sort of features to decide how you want to handle the latency in that. So that's the basic idea. So that's the drums, right? And so this is with the drum rack. And you're not going to see this, but So like, let me bounce over to Ableton to a blank clip here. And so now if I'm in here, I'm now gonna, on the push, I'm going to listen to the sounds. Yeah. So I'm listening to the sounds that I'm hitting on the push. And now I'm going to build a kit. So like, I'm going to build this all on the push. We're hitting something else. Oh, sorry, we're hitting that. Yeah, there we go. And the cool thing is I can do the things that you can do on the push. I'm going to double the length of the loop. So this is all happening in Ableton. If I switch over to Ableton, I've just doubled the length. I can double it again. I can do all of those things. I'm navigating on the clip view within the push. All that good stuff. You can do your repeats. All that craziness. So I just turned on and off the record button in Push, and that's letting me put in all these other kind of crazy things. So it's like an independent record button. I can turn the record button off now, and now I'm just navigating sounds within the Push. Anyway, that gives you an idea of what's happening there. So I was getting all that stuff, but I had turned off recording. So if I bring it back now, recording into the right track. There we go. So it was all getting in there. So you can see the madness, wherever our madness is, all the doubled up stuff. So yeah, that gives you an idea for drums. And now the next part is the synths. So close my drums. Let me open up my Acid synths. So now all I do is on the push, I just navigate to my synths track. Now, I don't have any. So there you go. So I'm now playing, so I'm playing it on the, and so for the synth sounds, so what you had to do in Cubase, one thing is in the studio setup, I did need to make sure and turn off the Ableton Push live port here, because it's always, there's always something coming in from that live port if I play it on the push, but we're only wanting to hear from the IAC drivers, not the push. So make that inactive. The other workaround would be to get in each of these individually if you wanted to, for some reason, have that push, and then you would like set these to the synth out. But by making that inactive, you can just kind of keep all these on all MIDI inputs, and it'll not pick up the drums. Yep. Oh, I'm wrong, because it's actually picking up the other IAC. So yeah, so in that case, you do want to, on your synths, you're going to want to make sure that you have selected your synths out of Ableton only. That way, it won't play when the drums is happening. So I think that's basically it. That's the idea. That's what I wanted to show. That's what I'm so stoked about. Yeah, hope somebody finds this helpful. All right, take care.